Welcome to KSOK Uncensored. Tonight's guest is David Shook, who is running for Clark County Sheriff in Vancouver, Washington. For those of you who do not know, that is where I grew up. Clark County, Washington. Other people know it as Van-Tucky. Great place. Always will hold a piece of my heart. But I also want to address something else. You may have seen that I have my name a little different than you're used to. I'm coming out of the closet with my real first name, which is Kristen. Feel free to call me Kristen or KSOK. That is my legit nickname. I'm ditching the Kate. I'm out of the closet. You know what? It's the time to make bold moves, and you can't hide forever. And I just want all of you to know who I've connected with over the years, that it's been an absolute pleasure, and I trust you enough for you to know my name now. So thank you for tuning in. Let's go ahead and bring David into the picture. Hey, how are we doing today?
Well, good evening, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for taking time to join us. I think it's really exciting to have people running for politics right now because, man, the season is hot and heavy. People are wanting to make a change. People want change. And thank you so much for putting your personal life aside to really dig your heels in to the Northwest here, and try to make a difference. And I just really appreciate that. It's very selfless.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. So I know that you have a lot of very loyal followers, and they actually were the ones who got in touch with me and asked to have you on, and it's absolutely my pleasure. I read up on you. I love what you're wanting to do in Southwest Washington. Let's just talk. I'm going to dive right in and we can work backwards. So you're running for Clark County Sheriff. I just want you to know I've gotten, I have a really, really clean record outside of, 117th going from orchards into battleground. I used to get pulled over all the time going 60 and a 40. And so if you are voted in as sheriff, do you think you could raise the speed limit from 40 to 60? I always thought 40 was too low.
How about more warnings instead?
That would be fantastic. I know that that's
Yes,
outside of, I just had to bring that up. But yeah, it was like clockwork. Once a year, I would get a 60 and a 40. I'm just kind of like, all right. Thank you very much. I don't do the crying gig. I'm sure you have many women that do that. No, I'm too tough for
I
that.
have.
But
Yes.
anyways, so I love that you're doing this. All right, let's talk a little bit about the platform you're running on, but I have a very important question. I just hosted a gubernatorial debate for the state of Oregon on Monday, and we took questions from folks that live in Oregon. And for the state of Washington, I want to do the same thing. I want to ask you a question that came up a lot, and it's about
Okay.
personal freedoms. And if you are voted in as sheriff, how would you address law enforcement officers potentially having to be called out on calls to enforce tyrannical mandates such as mask or vaccine mandates?
Yeah. So I've actually had that experience a few times here in Clark County, and usually it doesn't. It's really difficult sometimes, right? Because we have store owners that want to come in and they want to say, "Hey, listen, we're just following what the governor or whoever is telling us, the local health department's telling us to do." So I think
Mhm.
that people have the right, whether you're an employee or whether you're out there in this world as a citizen, to wear a mask, get vaccinated, whatever you want to do. So, but as a business owner, I also have the right to say, hey, I'd rather have you here or not. And so, uh, the way that we've handled it, and I agree with, is that it's a conversation. It's not an arrest. It's not those kinds of things. I know sometimes you see on the media, well, oh, the cops are out arresting these people. And in other parts of the country, that's actually happened. As sheriff, we
Mhm.
wouldn't be arresting folks like that. We don't have enough police officers on the street to take care of the rapes and the murders and the shootings that we're currently having, much less these mask mandates and other things that are going on. So
Excellent. I appreciate that answer very much. I know the guest I had on last week was talking about personal property rights, and I completely agree. Uh, and this is just a moot point, but really, what really ticks me off is that it's not truly these business owners' objective. It's the fact that they're afraid of getting fined or ticketed or shut down by the tyrannical leaders in the government. So that's
that's
disappointing. But
correct.
I really like your approach. You answered that very well, so I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you,
Thank you.
David.
Appreciate it.
Um, I want to talk about, so you were in the U.S. Army, and I want to thank you for your service. And then you transitioned over into law enforcement. So you spent 28 years, correct me if I'm wrong, 28 years in law enforcement post getting out of the military.
Yeah, it's somewhere in that 20 to 30 years, depending on volunteerism and volunteer reserves and things like that. But it's real close to that 30 years by now.
Excellent. Well, you're more than qualified, and I want to talk about some things that I know are really important to you. I'm here in the Northwest with you in the Portland area, and really keeping law enforcement officers here is incredibly difficult. I know it is for Portland. It's got to be for Vancouver and Clark County. What are your plans to not only attract new hires, maybe some laterals, but to have that longevity and to keep them?
It's kind of interesting the way that this state works. I actually had applied for the Clark County Sheriff's Office in 1992, and actually, I was glad I actually went to Oregon to get my first retirement. The system here makes people stay longer, and so what we need to do to attract folks is make it financially more attractive. So Clark County is the lowest paid in the state. They are the least amount of police officers in the state, and they use this matrix. So it's a per 1,000 population, and so we're somewhere in that 0.61 down to 0.54 or 0.52, depending on how many people have left in at certain times. And so that counts all the certified deputies and enforcement employees that are actually working on the road. For us, how do we attract that? Well, we have to make the compensation package attractive. So not just an hourly wage, but those incentives like if you have college, if you speak second languages, and those kinds of things that people grow along the way. Here at Clark County, at 20 years, you stop getting incentives. So we just had an employee leave after 43 years. And if he hadn't have promoted or gone to other things, he would have lessened or he would have not have been making as much money. And so there's got to be some other incentives to keep people along the way. For me, I want to use some health benefits and I want to do some other things along the way, maybe even a medical account after retirement so that you can make it into your Social Security and other things. To be attractive, the other thing that you got to do is you got to have a good place to work. Our organization here for the enforcement side, they have their own take-home cars, and where they've basically been policing from is a used fire station, or they were a second floor of a road department that ended up the floor was falling in and things like that. They actually have a sheriff's office downtown that was built in the 80s. And that's attached to our jail, which is antiquated. It's fallen apart. In fact, my first day at the sheriff's office here, there was a bunch of plastic visqueen above all the employees on the basement floor, including the sheriff's office. And I'm like, oh, they must be doing construction. And they're like, no, that's to actually keep all the urine and other feces and things like that from coming from the jail, which was up above everybody. And so really just disappointing as a work environment. But to keep people here, so our jail employees, for example, they're actually working 16-hour shifts to be able to make sure we have enough staff. And recently they've added some more overtime costs. So they're having more volunteers to take away some of those 16-hour shifts. But what happened here last summer is they actually took their guns away from many of them. And that was really kind of a slap in the face. I've heard from many of them because it's really kind of created this less than police officer. Now they're not certified, but they do most of the job of a police officer. But they're also dealing with the daily responsibilities of inmates, which is a critically important job for a sheriff. Having a jail, having an enforcement branch, having a records group that does those critically important things for the county. So I want to provide additional training for them. I want them actually doing more. I want our enforcement branch to do more things that are specialized in training and investigation. So we are reactive mostly in policing. That's just generally how it
Right,
is. But we need to be
right.
more proactive in finding those criminals that are the most egregious in our community. And that's going to take having more jail staff because the more jail staff we have, the more people we can keep in the jail. And again, as we continue to work through any COVID restrictions and stuff like that, that the state and local health officials have put on the sheriff's office and the jail, then we'll be able to make sure that we're putting more people in a secured facility until they can be seen by a judge and figure that out.
Ah, so good. So many things. And you're spot on. Just what I hear from my husband and other followers who are law enforcement officers, it's wild how reactive law enforcement really is right now. And for many reasons, but you just not only, and we can get into what's going on in Washington state, But not only is it just lack of staffing, lack of support, but I mean, it's just nobody wants to be, I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot more scaled down population wants to be in law enforcement today. And so it's very difficult. I want to let's talk about what I just alluded to. Jay Inslee. I mean, I know Governor Brown here in Oregon was rated like the worst governor in the United States. Inslee, in my opinion, is right there at the bottom with her. And in July 21, they really passed some police reform that were just absolutely crippled policing in the state of Washington. And I'm going to refer to my cards here, but just a few things. You can no longer have chokeholds, neck restraints, and no knock warrants. And I'm going to lean on you for expertise on this, but for me, I know that there's we want to go the less lethal route when safe to do so for the officer. And for me, I find it incredibly important for law enforcement officers to be trained in like JITS or Krav Maga or something so that they know how to take someone down. Or even these important moves, which may include a chokehold at some point in time. For me, and again, to correct me if I'm wrong, this is not I'm not a police officer, but it seems like to me that they're almost being forced to go the lethal route if that comes up, or get injured themselves because they're afraid to do that. I mean, what is going on here, and how do you work around this?
Well, what I would tell you is that through this country with George Floyd in 2020 and some other events that have happened across the country, right? Citizens have basically come to go out and get their legislatures to pass laws that are more restrictive for the police. There's a couple of things with that. So in our laws here in Washington State, they restricted some of the pursuits. Well, what I would tell you with pursuits is a lot of police agencies have already restricted those a lot, right? Because they're dangerous
Right.
and a lot of people will get injured and killed in those. And so they've already restricted those. That's kind of a national push. But here they're like, yeah, we're actually going to lessen that. And so they only allow pursuits for drunk drivers or domestic violence criminals or those highest crimes, rape, murder, robberies, things like that. So that's one of the crimes. They actually had one where they changed the standard, which was a national standard, from reasonableness and reasonable suspicion to be able to stop somebody. So you have a bank robber, you have a victim who says, hey, they were wearing a black jacket and they ran this direction. And then all of a sudden you see that person. Well, without probable cause, which is that next layer up of being able to prove that's the person. So that would be the witness saying, nope, that's actually him. The police couldn't stop that individual. And so that's probably the one law change that and recently they morphed it back a little bit and they changed that. So even though it started off as a really restrictive, it's actually gone back to a reasonable standard for some things, and that literally just came out a couple weeks ago. So again, some of the other
Okay.
laws about military equipment and some of those different things, which has been passed along from the military onto civilian law enforcement. In 1997, there was a shootout down in North Hollywood where they had AK-47s and the police had 9mm. And the difference was is they went and basically went to the pawn shop where they had rifles, shoulder-mounted rifles there, and they actually borrowed them so that they could go out and compete with these criminals.
Wow.
That's where that move started and there were some other positions with that, but it's just that ability to make sure that we as police officers have the tools necessary to deal with a much more dangerous society. And that's what we're dealing with. Much more dangerous society. Last year, police officers were ambushed. And I believe last year was the highest ever in ambushes for police ever in my career and anybody that's been around for a
Mhm.
long time. And so, again, as we try to make sure that our police officers are well trained tactically, but the other part to that is they have to be well trained in de escalation skills and communication skills and knowing mental health issues and how to effectively deal with all those folks, because that's who you get out there. You're not sure who you're going to run into at any one time. So, and again, there's lots of videos online where all of a sudden a police officer is just standing there and ambushed and killed.
Right.
And that's what we try to prevent as a trainer. I've been a trainer for police officers for most of my career, so almost covering the 30 years. And that's one of the things that I've been most proud of is seeing those police officers understand and get it but also being able to provide that understanding of compassion for these people that we're having to deal with out on the street. We don't know what they're going
Right.
through, but we have to make sure we're protecting ourselves, protecting you as the citizens, and then trying to quell whatever violence is happening at the time.
Wow. Yeah, that is a ton of responsibility. And I know you trained in Oregon, right? So my husband was NYPD before he came into Portland, and he said really the state of Oregon training was amazing in comparison. And so a lot of kudos to everyone thinks NYPD is like the bomb, right? But I mean, they really just have mass numbers. It's just quantity, and the training quality in Oregon is awesome. So to know that you were a part of that, kudos to you. I want to pivot to something, David, that we are seeing all over Portland. And for those not familiar with the Northwest, that is just right over the river. Vancouver, Clark County is where David is running and currently works. Homelessness. I mean, it's a problem. And again, at the debate on Monday, this came up quite a few times. What are you going to do about the homelessness? Now, from a law enforcement perspective, I'm curious. I am seeing it. I have family in Vancouver. I am seeing it spill out of Portland into Vancouver. So I'm curious. One, what your thoughts are on why we're seeing this in Vancouver. How are we going to rectify it, and what role could you play in that?
Sure. Well, the sheriff and most police agencies are not the primary
Right.
organization that should be focused on solving homelessness issues, right? This is a big onion, and a portion of it has to do with mental health, portion of it has to do with finances and money and lack of jobs and all those kinds of societal issues. And then you have the criminal justice component, right, where you have these people that are out either stealing or fighting or hurting each other, and then the police get involved, and then you figure out what are we going to do with them. And so as sheriff, and I was just having this conversation today, is that here the mentality is that homelessness and non-criminal activity is not a police matter. We don't have enough cops, we can't deal with all those kinds of things. But what ends up happening, and just last Thursday, when I think it was Thursday when I was out working, two, three, six calls of my day were with people that were homeless, having a mental health breakdown or some other issue, and dealing with those folks. And so, what's the answer? Well, you have them call the resource lines, and they rarely get on. Not that that's not a great resource, but that's the frustration with the end user of those homeless folks. And so, how do we do that? Well, we have to have a better comprehensive plan, getting all the stakeholders together in the same room, having the conversation. Like I was telling somebody today, the sheriff is not leading that conversation, but law enforcement has to be involved because we are dealing with them as the first responders. It's the homeless person who's sleeping in your business doorway or is using the bathroom on your window, your door, whatever, which happens occasionally, right? Or living under the bridge or on that. So in 2018, there was a case law. It happened over in Boise. I think it's Martin v. Boise, city of Boise. And it basically said if communities don't have resources enough for your homeless population, then you can't kick them out of public spaces to say, hey, you can't be on these public sidewalks. LA County, they spend millions of dollars storing people's property for the homeless population down there. Here, the state, the county, the cities, they've generally allowed them to camp in those public spaces without too much. There's processes though that could be used to move them along. So again, it's cleaning them up. The president was just here a couple weeks ago, and all of a sudden there was this huge camp over on 112th and Choclaw that disappeared. They came in and
Yep.
cleaned it up all of a sudden. And again, there was a purpose and a reason, but again, why not do that every other time? So I think when you set up expectations and if there are certain places for them to go, that's a good way to set up that. And then you can provide them those social services resources. That's not the sheriff's job, but sometimes they're breaking the law by stealing your stuff and
Right.
mine. And what do you do with them? Well, currently, because we're limited on our jail staffing, we're limited on our inmates, that those low level of criminals are not able to go to jail, maybe where they belong, or the mental health facility where they belong, or a hospital, wherever, right? And so it makes it very difficult to have some sort of a way to not punitive isn't the right way, but control those efforts and get them in front of a judge or to a special needs court to say, hey, listen, we're going to help you, but you've got to do some things to help solve your own issues here. And again, I think we all have to get together. This is a county-wide issue. The city has a really decent program and they're building little small villages around. The county has a program too. I understand they get millions of dollars every year, but 2 years that I've been working for the sheriff's office, I don't think I've heard one thing about resources available for the homeless people. And in fact, there's a little game that gets played with most of the agencies where a city or a county person will pick up a homeless person and they'll go in an ambulance, but instead of going to the ambulance of their area that they actually are patrolling, they'll take them to the one that might be in the city or the county, vice versa. For me, I just ask them where do they camp, and then they get to go back to wherever they're camping and living at. So, but again, the homeless thing is not just from a Portland thing. And when you actually talk to these folks, sometimes they actually go from Seattle to Portland to LA, and they move up and down the coast depending on where they're looking for resources and things like that. We've got to open those
Right.
portals so that those folks can have or access the resources that they need. Every one of them has a different story, and some of them are criminals. My experience from my former agency, which was outside of the Portland metro area, is that we actually had people moving into the rural areas because they didn't want to do drugs. They didn't want to get assaulted or raped and robbed and those kinds of things. And so they would come out into the other spaces where there wasn't necessarily a huge resource. And so again, we've got to find a way to make sure they're in the places that have the resources and that they're able to get in and actually have that opportunity to figure out how they can solve some of their own issues with homelessness.
Yes. No, I love that. Resources are incredibly important. And I do believe that the vast majority of homeless folks are dealing with either a drug issue or a mental health crisis. And I do feel that there need to be more resources for that for sure. I know something that's been coming up a lot just in my social media political world is that, it's the folks that don't have an issue that have the private property, like you were saying, feces, urine, panhandling, like just all whatever they call it today. I'm sure doubt they call it that anymore. Who knows?
Right.
But yeah, so that's what's really getting to people. Or you spend a ton of money on a to live in a nice neighborhood, and then it's just totally kosher to have a homeless camp right across the street in the park, right? So yeah, so it's a tough spin, but I completely agree. We need the resources. I want to pivot to crime. I know that in Portland, I mean, it's wild per capita. I feel like we're getting close to Chicago numbers, or we're trending in that direction. I personally feel that it had to do with when we defunded the Portland Police Bureau. One of the units to go was the gang violence. They've now refunded Portland and put in place a gun violence reduction team. Um, but the damage is done. The lawlessness is out of control, and I know it's spreading into Vancouver, Clark County. So I'm curious what role you can play in reducing that. Understanding it's not something that's going to be completely squashed in a year's time.
You know what I would tell you is you have to figure out where the organized criminal activity part of it, whether it's the huge amounts of drugs coming into this area to be passed out and sold to those folks that are experiencing that, or whether it's the catalytic converters, or for example, several times a day, Ford trucks are stolen all around the county. And we have, of course, no pursuit policies. So as soon as they get in a car, they take off, and we're like, sorry, we can't help you. In fact, we have some people call in and they're like, hey, I'm out at Jansen Beach or wherever in Clark County with my vehicle. Somebody's in it and they're driving, but they're in a parking lot. And we're like, hey, let us know when it's parked, because we're not going to come out there and get into any sort of a chase with those vehicles. So they're using those vehicles to steal trailers and other things, and then they're living in them or down at Delta Park and other places, but then they're stealing other things. And so
Yeah.
again, as they continue to kind of steal one thing to then go steal another thing and so forth, I think it's important to find out where we could strategize on finding those organized criminal aspects. There's something else and different happening with all this property, construction equipment, and everything that's being stolen. And so how do we
Yeah.
quell that a little bit? Well, we have a jail again that's limited. And in fact, the PAs and the judges are limiting some of the access to less than felonies. And so we have a juvenile justice system jail that only has 4 to 6 inmates in it. It's an 80-bed facility with 4 to 6 inmates and about 29 employees that are juvenile counselors. They have different things that they're doing.
Wow.
There's a facility that we could easily say, hey, this is going to be our misdemeanor facility, right? We have a jail work center that we could say, hey, listen, we're going to actually move around some of our other folks that are less dangerous. And maybe that's another place that we could add. And I think there's either 100 or 200 beds that could be available in there at some point. But again, it goes back to the staffing problem, getting those staff members here, making it more
Right.
attractive, having more of them. And so, how do we get to that? Well, again, you focus on the most egregious criminals, you focus on the organized criminals that are out there and actually doing it. And then you, at some point, you're like, listen, we're going to start adding these other folks to this jail facility and working with the prosecutors and working with the judges and having those alternative programs available. I think that when you start actually enforcing the laws that are on the books and getting the prosecutors to prosecute and the judges to adjudicate, again, they have big stacks of people that we've arrested, right? And so they're trying to triage all those cases as well. But I think we have to be proactive in how we get all those criminals accounted for. We need the state to open back up their state facilities. That's a restriction too. There's only about 50%, is the last time I looked, about 50% of the state beds are available. So where do the criminals that are convicted in county courts, where do they go? So again, we need the state to move up and get going with them. And it's a cascading effect. And we need to get going with that again. COVID is less, it's going down. I know they're talking about different things, but we need the state and the local health officials to start opening up some regular criminal justice activities that we can then use to get some of these individuals that are, hey, I've stolen 20 cars and I've only been into court once or 3 times and I got 10 days, or not even that. We've got
Yeah.
to make sure that the system is working. It's a very critical balance, that the police are doing their job, that the prosecutors are doing their jobs, and the courts are doing their jobs. And when that's out of
Right.
balance, it's not working very effectively. And I learned that
Not
at
at
other
all.
at other organizations. So
Yeah, I like what you're saying, David. And really, essentially, you have to stop the bleeding. And
that's
um,
right.
and you're an out of the box thinker. I really like it. I like what you're resourceful. You think out of the box. I really enjoy hearing your visions for what you would do as Clark County Sheriff. Really impressed. I have how many family members? Four that live in Vancouver. So I'm going to let them know that you have my support, and therefore that
I
carries
appreciate that.
forward. Yeah, absolutely. I want to know if you can share with everyone where to find you. And then for those that live in Southwest Washington, what do you need right now on your campaign trail? What can people do to help you?
Well, you can find me on any social media outlet at shuckforsheriff.com or Shuck for Sheriff. And I am currently, I need some assistance. So that's doing some knocking on doors and some other things. Donations, of course, are always helpful. This is a grassroots campaign. And as you were to look at everything else, I've been here 10 years. Everybody else has been here 30 plus years, but it doesn't mean I don't care about this community. I am doing this to solve some problems. This place has been broke for a while now. It's still broke. This ship is sinking, and we need to plug some holes quickly and get some folks here that are skilled police officers and others that can help our community become more safe. So, shuckforsheriff.com on all social media outlets, and you can find me there. And you can send me or drop me a letter or a note, and I'm pretty quick about getting back to folks.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And for those watching, I'm finding the more and more I get involved with politics is grassroots means not bought and paid for, right? By folks with deep pockets. So it's really important that we pay a lot of attention to grassroots candidates. I really feel that that is where the future is. For the success of our nation, we need to focus on grassroots candidates. So thank you for saying that, because that really just triggered with me. I am so sick of the bought and paid for people running for office. It's just power hungry grabs. So thank you very much, David. I'm very
Absolutely.
impressed again, and we will be in touch. And
Thank you very
best
much.
of luck to you. I think you have a very bright future.
I appreciate it, Kristen. Thank you.
All right. Have a great evening. Thank you very much. Excellent. Awesome. Well, you know what, guys? It was great having you on here. Thank you for tuning in. I know we were just a few minutes behind, but we are live and things happen. And I really appreciate each and every one of you. And like David said, he does need some help. So for those of you who are local, how awesome would it be to get involved? And then for those who are not, check out his website and see how you can help. Thank you very much. And we will see you next Thursday on KSOK Uncensored. Take care.